Welcome to Creative Tien channel. This is the part 2 of the Entrelac knitting. Last week we talked about how to machine knit the individual squares. Today we are going to put everything together so you can see a bigger picture. It starts to look like Entrelac knitting. This is a small diagram we did last week. You can see all the triangle shape. They are all the same and they slant to the same direction. And all the middle part are just squares. So you only need the squares and the triangle. And after you knit it up, you can just sew them together. And this is the new diagram I'm trying to make. I'm trying to make a blanket for my 7-year-old. But it does take longer time and a lot more yarns than I thought. If you see closely, the construction is the same. All the triangles are exactly the same. And in the middle, it's just the squares. So it's very simple. It just takes time and it takes a lot of yarns. Because I'm using the Lion brand mandala yarn, that means it's color changing. I just want to make sure I start from one side, go through the first row, and then go to the second row. I have to do it in order so the color changing will not be out of place. If I knit all the triangles first, it might be one color and it will not match the center squares. But that can be another look. It can be a special design too. And here is what I have so far. You can see the color changing because of the yarn. And the corner two triangles are actually the same. So that's the basic structure if you want to make up your own diagram. Make sure the corner is like that. And there will be squares in the middle. And every time I finish either a triangle or a square, I will leave a longer yarn tail so I can seam up from the back side. So the yarn tail color will be similar to what I have in that area. This is the back side. You can see I just do a simple whip stitch and try to match the color as close as I can. And when I place a new square, I try to have the extra yarn tail on the top and use up the yarn tail below so I can have more extra yarns later for seaming. And one issue with this project is there will be a lot of yarn tails to weave in later. But I'm thinking to add a piece of cotton fabric in the back and just sew it up. So it looks kind of like a quilt and it will be more practical to use and it will hide all the yarn tails. So I'm looking closer at my diagram here. I start from the bottom, so it's 7 triangles. And on the second row, I actually start with a triangle and then 6 squares and then end with a half square or the triangle. And the third row is all squares. And it will be 7 squares. And the fourth one is the same as the row 2. It will be triangle, 6 square, and triangle. And the fifth one will be all squares. So you just keep alternating with the triangles on both sides and with only squares. When you are ready to wrap up, you can just knit all the triangles the same way as the beginning. So if you want to make your own blanket, it's better to draw the diagram first because sometimes it can be confusing. And the assembly is actually very simple. We start with the 2 triangles and then a square. Just make sure they are in the opposite direction. So this one goes this way and this one goes that way. All the first row goes in that direction and all the second row goes in that direction. The second row starting with a triangle The third row is all square. And then the fourth row, again, the same as the second row. I start with a triangle and end with a triangle. I still need to make one more triangle. And because we have so many triangles and squares to make, I made a cast-on rack. For this cast-on rack, it's just very simple stockinette stitch. I have 20 stitches and need about 15 rows. You can make it longer and bigger, it doesn't matter. With this cast-on rack, you have some place you can hang your cast-on comb, so it will be easier to start in an E-rub cast-on, and the tension will be better. It will be much easier to knit. So this is how I use my cast-on rack. I will just hang it on the needles. It doesn't really matter which spot you pick, but it makes sense to pick under the first chain. I use both legs. You can also use only one leg. Now we can hang the weight. It's easy to hang the weight now, and I can even add one extra weight. Next, we are going to put our ravel cord. I don't have the ravel cord that comes with the machine, but I can just use yarn that's a little bit more smooth and a little bit thinner to use as a ravel cord, so we can pull it out later easily. And this is just a piece of cotton yarn, and it's thinner, so it's easier to pull. And for the ravel cord, I'm not going to run this through the mast. I'm just going to place it in the carriage. Now we have the yarn tail. I'm going to clip it so it doesn't get tangled. Now we are ready to do our regular E-rub cast-on or any type of closed cast-on. And if your carriage is on the left side, usually I just lift it up, push down, lift up, and move it to the right. Now we are ready to E-rub. And I always like to start with a clip to hold the yarn. Move it to the back, and this go back to 000. And for this one, I'm going to need a triangle. So let me start by knitting first row. And now knit it back. And I like to decrease from the right side. Decrease one stitch, and I will knit one row. And decrease again from the right side. And now I need 2 rows. So we are alternating 1 rows and 2 rows, and I always decrease from the right side. Now I only have 3 stitches here. I'm going to decrease with the 2-prong tool. Knit 1 row. And then decrease again. So there will be only 1 stitch left. And I will knit. So you can see the triangle. We just created a triangle. I can take out the weight. Here I like to cut the yarn and leave in a longer yarn tail. Maybe around 1 foot or 15 inches. And just go through the loop. So now that's secure. We can take out all the clips. Now we can start pulling the ravel cord. Okay, and then separate the two pieces. And you can see the cast on side is neater. The tension is more even. And that's our triangle piece. And because I use the 3-prong transferring tool, the edge is a little bit stiff, so it doesn't curl much. And it's the same to knit the square piece. I cast on 20 rows with a cast on rag, and I'm going to add the ravel cord. And now I'm just going to do the regular E-wrap and start knitting 26 rows and bind off. And we showed that in the last week's video, so I will put a link if you want to see more. Now we knit up the 3 pieces, 1 triangle and 2 squares. And we just want to make sure it's in the right position and right direction. For this row, it all runs this direction. So this piece will be the same. And the next row, it will be the opposite direction. Once you decide the position, we can just sew it up. And there are many ways to sew it up. I'm just using whip stitch, and you have the right side facing, and pick up one of the young end and sew it up. For the square one, I try to have the long young tail on the top because we usually have enough young tail in the bottom, and I will pick those young tail to sew up the bottom side. And we just keep going. So that's it. That's how we make this textured blanket. So thank you for watching today, and see you next week.